So Eshbal Ratzon is a first-year faculty fellow at the Department of Jewish Philosophy and Talmud at Tel Aviv University. And today she'll be speaking to us about the first Jewish astronomers, astronomy in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Thank you. I'll just add that I'm also part of the Cohen Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science, together with the Jewish Philosophy Department. Let me share the screen. Okay, so hi everyone. Was there a Jewish astronomy in the ancient world? What did Jews know about the universe? When these questions are asked, people often want to know how much the ancient Jewish science was close to our modern one. Although it is an interesting question, historically speaking, it is not the right one. A historian should judge ancient science in the context of its time, and not anachronistically in comparison to modern science. A historical attempt to examine the ancient Jewish astronomy may raise some more specific questions. For example, did Jews living in antiquity ever bother themselves with questions we now call scientific? Do we have documented celestial observations? If they did make observations, did they have the tools and terminology to describe them? Was there any attempt to find generalizations? Did they try to find one theory to explain more than one phenomenon? Were they familiar with the work done by their contemporary scientists in the surrounding cultures? Did they have any independent insights? What were their considerations when preferring one explanation over the other? In order to answer these questions, we must examine our sources. The oldest preserved Jewish literature is the Hebrew Bible. Unfortunately, the Bible does not include detailed scientific discussions. There is only a very general acquaintance with the celestial bodies. It may be related to the genre, which is religious literature. Theoretically, it is possible that scientific texts from that period existed, but have not survived. However, a comparison to the rest of the ancient Near East makes it very unlikely. In Egypt, and even more so in Mesopotamia, a significant scientific activity took place. It consisted of detailed celestial observations, highly sophisticated scientific theories, and technological developments of clocks and other measuring tools. It was the priestly elite that was mostly responsible for this activity. In Israel, on the other hand, the priestly elites who authored the biblical literature do not show any awareness of the knowledge of their peers in the surrounding empires. Not only do they not leave any records of observations, but there is also no systematic description, for example, of the calendar, a theme that is most relevant to the religious cult and was quite central in later Second Temple period. The earliest Jewish astronomical texts come from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are the oldest literary texts outside of the Hebrew Bible. They were collected and then hidden in caves by a Jewish religious community, some would call a sect, living in the Judean desert approximately 2,000 years ago. Found in the middle of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls are considered one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Israel and perhaps even in the world. Their content has significant implications on our understanding of ancient Judaism and the background for Christianity. I will present a few examples of the astronomical content of the scrolls referring to time measurements and mapping of space, and then go back to the general estimation of the science in the scrolls. Beginning with time measurements, the most basic time unit is the day, marked by sunrise and sunset. Human cultures developed larger time units, such as months and years, in addition to smaller time units of hours, minutes, and seconds. All of these units are expressed in multiplications or fractures of the day. In the nearest geographical surroundings, two main calendars were used, a solar calendar in Egypt and a lunar calendar in the Semitic areas of Mesopotamia, Syria, and the land of Israel. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we find a new Jewish calendar of a 364-day year, which is known as a cornerstone of sectarian disputes of the Second Temple period. The 364-day year is an approximation of the length of the solar year with three advantages. Firstly, 364 divides equally into 4, enabling a symmetry between the 4 seasons. Secondly, the synchronization between this calendar and the schematic lunar calendar is quite simple, but I will not get into it at the moment. In the Jewish context, the 364-day year had another advantage. 364 divides equally into 7, a typological number with religious connotations in Jewish culture. Each 364-day year contains exactly 52 weeks, which allows for the assignment of the festivals to fixed days of the week in order to avoid their coincidence with the Sabbaths. This calendar was also synchronized with other religious periods through very long cycles. Thus, the guiding rules that led the Qumran community to choose this calendar are symmetrical aesthetic, together with religious considerations, which were preferred over the accuracy of other known calendars. Let us move to spatial theories. The universe, according to several ancient Jewish texts, is compared to a stone building or tent composed of 3 layers. The bottom level is the abyss, sunk in water. Above it stands the earth, which is flat, finite, and square, above which the firmament is spread like the sheet of a tent, stretched over 4 pillars, sloping over them to the edges of the earth. Heaven is above the firmament. This is where God and his angels, as well as the luminaries and other meteorological phenomena, dwell. Unlike modern explanations, these sources perceived the sun as going back to its heavenly abode at night. So, if it is in heaven, how come we do not see it? That's because the firmament blocks our view. We are able to see it during the day because it passes through the heavenly gates, doing its daily course underneath the firmament until it enters back to its heavenly abode at night after sunset. Although it seems like a mythological description, the firmament and its gates were an early attempt to explain several astronomical and meteorological phenomena. In a composition named First Enoch, which was also preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a detailed description of the gates, which is not found in earlier literature. The authors of First Enoch use the mythological concept of the gates found in earlier literature and make it to a spatial mapping system that allows expression of the daily positions on the horizon where the sun and moon are observed, thus creating a horizontal coordinate system from an older mythological concept. These were merely 2 short examples of the way of thinking of the early Jewish astronomers. Going back to the questions posed at the beginning of this presentation, we can now answer that. Since the 4th or 3rd century BCE, Jews start to deal with scientific questions not only from a theological point of view, but also in a systematic descriptive way. Jews were observing the sky and were familiar with astronomical phenomena. They created tools to describe these phenomena, time units and space mapping. The gates theory, for example, was meant to give a unified explanation for several astronomical and meteorological phenomena. Apparently, the first Jewish astronomers were familiar with both Babylonian and Egyptian concepts. They did not always use the most updated and complex science of their time, but this was probably a theological and aesthetic choice, rather than ignorance. Following, while they maintain international networks, they retain an independent thinking, creating their own units and astronomical theories to explain several phenomena. This should be appreciated even if these theories are no longer accepted today. Separating religion and science is a modern demand. Jewish astronomers are not exceptional in their time by combining these considerations. Even the most developed science in Babylon was combined with omens, predictions, and mythology. In conclusion, the first Jewish astronomers were creative thinkers, combining astronomical observations with their local religious culture. While their conclusions cannot be maintained today, their intellectual pioneering project must be appreciated. Thank you.
If anyone would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, ask anything.
Eshbal, I'm just wondering, as a mathematician, the number 7, I'm just curious to know what is, how it came to be so, such an etymological number, and do you even have a guess why do we count our week with 7 days?
So it's an interesting question, which I'm not sure we can truly answer, but we have several guesses. So first of all, in the Jewish context, it appears in the earliest literature we have in the Hebrew Bible. So we don't see it evolving. We see it already very central. But going to the ancient Near East and specifically to Mesopotamia, we do see its importance. First, because they used the sexagesimal basis, and so the number 6 was important in their math. So you can think of the number 7 as maybe beyond nature or something like that. But also it's important within nature because you do see a division of the month into 4 quarters. So approximately 7 days for each quarter. It's not a very, we don't really have like a very definite answer to that, but these are 2 directions.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a little question. The historian of religion, Wouter Hanegraaff, has argued that we should, there is basically 3 elements at work. One is religion, one is science, and then the third in the mix is magic, he says. And so my question is, how does magic relate to all of this in the ancient times?
I have to admit, I haven't read him, but, and I don't know on what cultures he based his estimation, but thinking about, again, I'll go to the Mesopotamian culture, not to the Jewish one, because it's more complicated because of monotheism and religious laws against magic. I wouldn't differentiate them to 3 different disciplines. I would think that magic is kind of a part of science in Mesopotamia. And both of them are part of religion. So I would say that the distinction is maybe modern.
Very nice. That's great. That's okay. What I like to hear. Good.
Do we know anything about controversies they would have been in the ancient Jewish cultures? Because what I know from, European science and then the way they imagine how the sun and the stars moved has been really a very strong, and difficult controversy. And
So it's a very good question. We know of religious disputes regarding the calendar because the calendar that I presented that was common in the Dead Sea Scrolls was not used by most other Jews. Probably in the temple in Jerusalem, they used the lunisolar calendar that was more common in Mesopotamia and in the area in general, in the Semitic regions. And this has many different questions in the background, like can human affect time and establish the calendar, or was it only established in creation by God and it's already sanctified and we can't intervene? So the religious aspects of it, yes, we know a lot of many disputes, and the Jewish society of the Second Temple was very fractured. But regarding science, we have so little sources, so few. So even if we do find some developments, even we have to admit that we have Hellenistic Judaism, mainly in Egypt. They were more aware of Greek science, but we don't see them actually arguing with each other. So it seems like they didn't even know each other's science to be able to have arguments. So yeah, it's difficult to know because we have so few sources. Even within the Dead Sea Scrolls, sometimes we see developments, but it doesn't seem like they argue with each other.
And I have a second question. This idea that the sun is entering through a gate and traveling in the sky and then leaving through another gate and then traveling in space that you can't see, for me reminds me of the Egyptian mythology with
Yes.
the travel of Ra. Was there like influences?
Yes. I think that the Egyptian context is very much neglected in scholarship of the Dead Sea Scrolls and specifically of science in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I do try to touch it upon it a little bit, and it needs more. It needs to be extended because I think that there is much more into it. Yes, most scholars refer to Mesopotamian relations. Yeah.
All right, I think we're about out of time. Thank you, Eshbal. Appreciate that. That was really interesting.